Hey, how are you? In this video, I'll be sharing my watercolor portrait process from start to finish. I'll be walking you through the portrait study using a reference. First, let's begin by going over the supplies. Since this is a watercolor study, you're going to want some good paper, something that can hold a lot of water. This is a watercolor sketchbook with Fabriano paper. Your watercolors of choice, either in a palette or in tubes, a variety of round brushes, a pencil, and a kneaded eraser. I'll explain what I do with that little guy. Water cup or two is optional. Once that's prepared, we're ready for the sketch. Beginning with our drawing, I'm going to be using a really light line, and here's our reference for today. I will be stylizing it a bit and choosing different colors as an experiment, but upon starting, I'm always looking at the shapes and the negative space. Let's take a quick look at the reference so we can better understand these shapes. This photo is from a free online resource. I mentioned these resources in a previous video. A great little tip is to import your image into your iPad or iPhone and just select out the shapes that we see in the shadow. We have some beautiful contrast in this reference. Since our light source is coming from above over on the right, we already want to begin to think about this and make sure that we preserve it in our sketch and in our painting. Super, super important. So as we're getting to know the subject, which by the way should captivate and excite you, we want to begin with a really light line and focusing more on a geometric shape outline. When it comes to the pressure that you put on your pencil, keep this as light and as gentle as possible in the beginning. Since we're working with watercolor, we want to keep as much of the white of the paper as possible, just for today's demo at least. Now this is where my handy dandy kneaded eraser comes in, and I just lightly tap to lift any extra pencil if it gets a little too dark. The great thing about those erasers is they don't shed any eraser shavings, and I find it quite useful whenever needing to lighten up your pencil. Remember, the sketch is your foundation layer. Take your time, really observe the subject, and this will make your painting process way smoother. Now that our sketch is complete, we can begin painting. The first thing that I like to do is to create a mixture with a lot of water, slightly tinted. I set my reference to black and white because we want to be focusing on the values rather than color, because if our values are correct, everything else falls into place. Here what I'm doing first is getting in this whole shape over on the left, and while the paint is wet, I'm adding slightly more pigment, and since our light source is coming from the right, I'm adding a bit more warmth towards that section as well. Once the first layer dries, I begin with my second layer to add some more warmth there, and I'm really taking my time here and observing. I then mix a darker shadow. Notice how I'm not using black, it's more of a maroon dark red, and I'm carving out those shapes that I see. And since the paint seemed to be a bit wet, it started to bleed here, and I specifically didn't edit this out for you guys to see that things do happen and you just gotta let watercolor do its thing sometimes. The beautiful and daunting thing about watercolor, it's always going to dry differently, it's always going to blend differently, it's going to granulate differently, so we must surrender to the process, let go, and just allow it to do its thing. I'm now beginning to mix some darker tones and adding brighter color into the fabric. Watercolor is all about working your way from light to dark. Each medium forces you to think differently and adjust your process. Well, the best thing we can do with watercolor is work in really light layers. And remember, once a layer is dry, you can go back in and add some more depth to it. So once I worked on the hair and the fabric, I began carving out those shadow shapes in the eyes, the nose. Always add more warmth to the cheeks and the nose as well. And I'm also working on softening those really hard edges. As the warmth comes to life in this portrait, a quick word from our kind sponsors, Squarespace. This is a website where you can build your online shop, your online business, your art portfolio, you name it. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for you to build your online presence. I set up my website a few years back with Squarespace before they were a sponsor. I've always loved how beautiful and seamless my shop looks. This is definitely thanks to their award-winning templates. When I was at the very beginning stages of building my website, I love the preliminary survey that shows up on the screen. After filling it out, Squarespace gives you some starting ideas and examples. Then I was able to pick my favorite template and simply drag and drop some images, and voila, the website was ready. They also have a password protect feature, which is perfect for my secret Patreon shop. So many awesome features, so go to squarespace.com for your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/JessCarp for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now that we've got a few warm layers of shadow, I'm bringing in even more warmth with a different pigment over on the left with the reflected light. The right of the face stays the brightest, and we also have a little bit of that yellow light coming in from the left, as you can see. It's not as dark as our shadow, but it's there. Next, I slowly begin introducing some darker values for the eyes. This footage is sped up, but when I tell you I'm going turtle speed here, I'm really taking my time and going slow. My goal is to preserve the highlights yet create more contrast than I have here as well. When using my brush, I'm applying really light pressure to lay in those tones, and then I can go in with a little bit more water, clean out my brush, and that way it'll soften out those sections. Glazing is a term you can use for any medium. With watercolor, I like to glaze in with light layers on top of one another as they dry. Of course, there are many different styles and techniques. However, I personally prefer to see all those juicy layers underneath another. Similar to colored pencils where you can see different colors show through, I'm just really playing around with intensifying the warmth and different shadows that I see. Remember to think about your overall silhouette and shape of the study that you make. Every visual shape and stroke that is present plays a role. If you have a feeling to add a different color in, I wanted to add in a little bit more cool to contrast the warmth, so I added a little bit more ultramarine blue. And I was really debating with this eye over here. I felt like I wanted to leave one of them to be a bit less detailed. However, after a little back and forth of thinking, since it is in complete shadow, I wanted to create more depth to it and a lot more darkness. And I fell in love with this goldish warm color, so I added it into the right side to show the sunlight coming through. When creating portrait studies, you're essentially bringing a human to life on your paper. Really feel the expression and think about how you can emphasize certain features. Every face has an expression and every face has an emotion. As humans, we're given the gift to feel very deeply. So while you're creating your study, really bring that into the eyes. As I create each layer, I like to do one final pass with a cool green. You can also do a very light blue. That really balances out that warmth in the skin. And I always like to finish off with a final layer of touch-ups. These are minuscule minor adjustments, but they really wrap it up and bring it all together as a whole. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. Definitely subscribe down below for more. Huge warm thank you to my patrons. If you want some slowed down videos and exclusive content, a library of worksheets and tips, check that out if you're interested. I'm really pleased with the way this portrait came out. I tried to focus on incremental improvements and really getting that lighting in. I'm wishing you a beautiful day or night wherever you are. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.